Oh, Congressman Jayapal, thank you so much for that inspiring keynote speech. I see a lot of information in our chat from our conference attendees today, really appreciating what you are saying and who you are and how you approach this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you again to everybody. This is a collective endeavor.
Well, let's chat a little bit about, I'd really like to know more about you, and I think our folks would like to know about you. We've seen you in the news, and we'd like to, we've seen you for quite a while now representing the state of Washington, but tell us a little bit about how you got to Congress and who you are.
Well, as I mentioned, I was an activist for 20 years before coming to Congress. I worked internationally as an activist and an advocate on international issues. And then soon after 9/11, I started what ended up being the largest immigrant advocacy organization in Washington state, one of the largest in the country. But as we worked on those issues, we found that really everything is intertwined, right? And that economic justice, gender justice, social justice, racial justice, they are all deeply intertwined. I like to say I'm not a woman on Monday, an immigrant on Tuesday, a worker on Wednesday, and a mom on Thursday. I'm all of those things all of the time. And so we started working on economic justice issues. We started working on housing, minimum wage, paid leave, so many different pieces, collective bargaining. All of that was part and parcel of the work that we did, and we created a really powerful coalition. I never thought I would be in elected office. I actually, I'll be honest and say that I didn't have a lot of faith in too many of our elected officials. There were some that did really inspire me, but I felt like there wasn't enough representation of people who really bear the burden of disproportionate action, of people who are the most vulnerable, and that there wasn't enough power built to make our institutions of government function for working people instead of for the wealthiest. But I realized after 15 years of doing the outside organizing work that my theory of change was wrong, and that instead of shunning elected office and elected officials, what if we thought about elected office as a place to organize? What if we thought about building a stronger, more organized presence for justice and economic and gender and racial justice inside of our elected bodies? And so I ran for the state Senate in 2014. I became the first South Asian American ever elected to state legislature. I served in the Senate for 2 years and then ran for Congress in 2016. I was elected the same year that our former president, he who shall not be named, was elected, and it was really rough. But it was a time for great organizing inside Congress. I'm the first South Asian American woman to serve in Congress. I'm one of only less than 100 women of color to ever serve in Congress. And it's been a great training. My organizing has been a great training to make sure that the things we do here in Congress are really for the benefit of poor people, low wealth people, working people, and those who are most vulnerable.
It sounds like you moved that organizing skill right into the Progressive Caucus. And tell us a little bit about what that is, who's in it, what's it doing, who, what, where, when, why.
Yeah. Well, sometimes people ask me what it means to be a progressive, and I always say,
good question.
What it means to be a progressive is that you are the first to the best and most just idea, and then everybody else runs to catch up with you as you build that movement bigger and bigger. So that's the same philosophy in Congress. The Progressive Caucus was started back in 1991 by Bernie Sanders, Maxine Waters, a whole group of really strong, wonderful progressives who continue to be on the forefront of a lot of our best progressive ideas. But as Bernie himself has told me, it was sort of like more of a place where people would go to complain about the fact that the establishment was not picking up the ideas of progressives. It was like a place where people would come and hang out and talk about their frustrations.
A complaint club.
Exactly. But it wasn't necessarily organized for power. And so when I came in, Keith Ellison and Raul Grijalva were the co-chairs, and they were really starting to change the thinking around how you organize. And I got to slide right into that. I was recruited by Keith to come in. And my background is on building, organizing infrastructure. So now what we passed a rules reforms package, because there are a lot of people out there who wanted to say they were progressives for their elections, but not necessarily vote with us. So we passed reforms that really require people to sign on to a threshold of progressive legislation, require people to vote with us. And it has really been a unifying and powerful experience to be able to see people empowered in a new way in the Progressive Caucus, individually, but also collectively. And so that's what we did during Build Back Better. And it was not easy, but we had to hold the line. Even when our own president, our own speaker were telling us to just pass the infrastructure bill, but not Build Back Better, we said, no, we need universal childcare. We need this housing investment. We need long-term care. These are the things that are going to affect how people wake up and feel every day. And it can't just be about roads and bridges. That's not the infrastructure we're talking about. We're talking about, of course, that's important, but we're talking about having a home. And the Progressive Caucus, in all of the meetings that we led with the president when he called us into his office, we were the ones who put housing on the table. And we unified around 5 key demands that included climate change. The Inflation Reduction Act would never have passed without progressives passing Build Back Better. So we were able to get several things in the Inflation Reduction Act, but unfortunately the things that were left out by not passing Build Back Better were housing, were childcare. And I mentioned this at the beginning, but I think it's worth saying again to a housing conference that the 2 biggest inflationary costs are housing and childcare that families are facing today. And if we had passed Build Back Better, we would have addressed, not completely, I'm not saying it was a silver bullet, but universal childcare and at least $150 billion investment in housing would have taken us a long way to addressing the real challenges that are still out there facing people, despite all of the incredible work that we Democrats and President Biden have done.
So this is a lot of information. So tell us a little bit about the bill that you brought forward, the Housing as a Human Right. You brought it forward again in March. What's the status of it today, and what's the thinking now?
Well, I introduced it again in March and continuing to talk about it. It's got 23 co-sponsors. I would recommend that anybody here who, I can't remember where the Oregon members of the delegation are. They tend to be extremely supportive of these bills, but be great for people to just check and make sure your member is on there. But also if you have people in other states that you're connected with, let's continue to build the number of co-sponsors. I want to be honest and say that we don't control the House. And it is I don't want to use bad language on this podcast, but there's a very technical term called a shit show going on over here in Congress. And so it has been very challenging for us to get real legislation that is proactive, on the offense through, because everything that they want to do is cut housing, cut support services, cut mental health, cut teachers, cut WIC, cut SNAP. And the cuts that they're proposing are taking us back to like 2007, 2008 levels. So it is a real challenge for us. What we have to do is play defense, of course, stop the bad things from happening, stop these cuts from happening. But we also then have to propose. We can't just be an opposition party. We also have to be a proposition party. And so Housing as a Human Right is our proposition, one of our proposition bills on housing. And the hope is that we take back the majorities and we can pass these bills when we have the majority back. But just one thing on that structurally, really important for people to understand this, because I was pretty political, but I didn't understand the limitations of structure. Because in the Senate, you have what's called the filibuster. The filibuster gives 40 senators who represent 11% of the country's population the ability to block any bill, not just from being voted on, but even from being debated. We can get rid of the filibuster, but we need 50 Democrats who are willing to do that. And if we don't have 50 Democrats who are willing to do that, then budgetary items like a housing investment might be possible to move forward. But some of the policy changes that are required simply will not be able to move forward. So we really need to focus on making sure that all 50 Democrats, that we get 50 Democrats in the Senate who are willing to get rid of the Jim Crow legacy filibuster. Otherwise, everything that we pass in the House will never make it in the Senate.
So as we're kind of in this limbo period, then you're continuing to advocate for this bill, continue to update it, continue to understand how it can be better, and continuing to sign on co-sponsors. Very good.
Yes, and if people have suggestions to it, please let our office know. We'd love to, we coordinate with housing advocates across the country, but we're always open to making it better.
Well, that's another question, is that how, as we learn about this as individuals, can we become advocates? And everyone has a great idea, but how do we become useful to you and to your process for advising you about what's going on out here in the provinces?
Yeah, it's such a great question. So a couple things. One is always feel free to reach out to me on any of my bills. I would be happy to have that feedback. And so you can always do that through our office. We have terrific staff here who handle housing. I think it's also worth looking at the bills that your congressional delegation has authored and making sure you're giving them feedback. But I also think that we do have this executive action agenda. And if you go to the CPC website, and maybe somebody will give it to me because I'm actually not sure what it is, but I think it's US Progressives. Progressives.house.gov. You will be able to find our executive action agenda there. And you can send a letter. You can get a coalition of organizations to sign on and send a letter to President Biden and the White House saying, please enact these executive orders. Please use the tools of your government to enact these executive orders. I will say the president cares deeply about this issue. They have used their executive power in ways that previous administrations have not done for real good. They haven't gotten through everything yet. But I think the more they hear from you that these are important to them, the more of an impact you can have. Getting co-sponsors on legislation is critically important. So that is another way to really be active. And it's not just my legislation. There are, as I mentioned, the Progressive Caucus has a set of 6 bills that members introduced. Maxine Waters is the chair of Financial Services and Housing, is within her purview. And I know that they have a series of things that she has advocated for. So those are all ways to engage directly with us. But the other is to organize amongst yourselves. The more we have a clear message on the outside about what the solutions are, if there are things that you see working in your community, even if it's on a small scale, let us know. We want to talk about the successes. We want to talk about the alternatives to criminalizing homelessness. And we need to have that information from you. And we want to see you organize around that in your own areas, because I do believe at the end of the day that the power of organizing is the strongest power that you can have. And I'm biased because I'm an organizer. But
you're living proof.
That's what I believe changes the dynamic.
You mentioned a word a few minutes ago. You're going to be on your way to a vote in just 20 minutes. What's going on with this shit show? Is Hakeem Jeffries going to be the next Speaker of the House?
Well, he should be. And frankly, if it were about who has saved this body and the American people time and time again, even in the last 9 months, it is House Democrats led by Hakeem Jeffries, because Republicans could not pass the debt ceiling bill. They needed Democrats to pass that. Republicans did not pass the recent bill to avert the shutdown. Actually, it was 208 Democrats and only half of the Republican caucus that passed that bill to avert the shutdown. These Republicans cannot govern. They are extremists. They govern as extremists. They cater to the extremists. They push policies like a nationwide abortion ban, like cutting, slashing spending on things like housing and healthcare and education, kicking hundreds of thousands of teachers out of the classrooms, cutting LIHEAP for people, vulnerable people across the country, cutting WIC, cutting SNAP. That's all they know how to do. Cruel, extreme, and absolutely unworkable. None of those bills would have any opportunity to move forward in the Senate. So Matt Gaetz has introduced a motion to vacate the chair of the speaker. And I will tell you, we had a very intense, really incredible, actually wonderful caucus meeting this morning, Democratic caucus meeting. The Progressive Caucus Executive Board had met maybe 10 days ago, and then we had a Progressive Caucus meeting of our members about a week ago. And so we had already been very clear that there is no way that we should save Kevin McCarthy. We have no responsibility to save Kevin McCarthy. Kevin McCarthy is an extremist. He is a liar. He is shilling for the former president who incited an insurrection and tried to interrupt the election results. There is no reason for us to save Kevin McCarthy. This is the Republicans' problem. So united behind our speaker, that is what you will see happening today. Democrats voting no. Well, actually, what will happen is there'll be a motion to table first. Matt Gaetz has introduced his motion to vacate the chair. There will be a motion to table that the Republicans will offer. We are not voting with Kevin McCarthy on this. We won't vote present. We will not vote to table the motion. So it will move then to a vote of the entire body on whether or not Kevin McCarthy should vacate the chair. And what I can tell you is I believe that we will have a unanimous or extremely near unanimous vote, and that we will not vote to save McCarthy. We will stand united behind Hakeem Jeffries. Our job is to elect a Democratic speaker. We have our speaker, that's Hakeem Jeffries. We voted for him 15 times. We'll vote for him a 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th time if we have to.
That's news. With breaking news right here in the
That is breaking news, actually. I think you're the first people I've spoken to officially about it. I did say on camera that we should just let the Republicans wallow in their pigsty of absolute inefficiency, ineffectiveness, and that is what they're going to do.
Well, frank and straightforward, Representative Jayapal. Let me ask you a couple of questions that come from the chat. We have people who are very concerned about folks trying to get housing, trying to leave homelessness, but have a felony conviction somewhere along the line, and just they're blocked. They can get program housing that we support, that's 100% supported, but when they try to rent their own, they can't get it. What can we do about the checkbox?
We have to get rid of that. I mean, we've worked on that in localities with ban the box on employment. It needs to be there on housing. I mean, this is absurd. If people have a felony conviction, they've done their time, they are out, and then we put barriers in the way again. And I just think this continued criminalization, even after somebody has come out, is actually no way to run anything. We need to make sure people have the right to vote. We need to make sure they have the ability to get a job. We need to make sure they have the ability to get housing. All of these things are what we need and what we want people to be able to do so that they can live with dignity. So that is both a movement. A lot of movements, start on the local levels with municipalities taking actions, and then they build into something that can be at the federal level. Of course, we have been working on this at the federal level, but it is going to take a both and, effort to try to make this happen.
So one of the things that we could do, and there's all sorts of these niche populations within homelessness, is give incentives to landlords and educating landlords. Any thoughts about how we can educate landlords better about that they are part of the solution for this?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because there has been this real divide between private landlords and public housing. And my belief is that we have to engage all parts of the housing community in the solution. So I have been convening some tables in Seattle of private landlords, because I do think we need to have them at the table. I think we need to, particularly the smaller ones, the ones that are just have single, double units or 10, 20 units. We need to utilize every available unit that is there And frankly, what I have found is that these landlords understand, most of them understand that they want to be a part of the solution. And sometimes it's about incentives, but sometimes it's also about just inviting them to come in. And so some of the efforts that I know have been working in Seattle, and I know you have perhaps some similar things going on in Oregon, is the ability to find and refer and connect people to the places that are available. And if you think about the places that are available as like a big map, we need to know where all the holes are in that map. And then we need to have connectors that can help to connect people with those homes and also to continue to provide any supportive services that people might need. That's the kind of, very comprehensive approach that I think we need. And I don't think we can demonize all the private sector landlords, because they have units and we need those units. But that doesn't mean I'm backing down on the private equity pieces, because what we find with private equity is when they take over big apartment buildings, then they push people out, the rents go up, and it's really just about making profits for that private equity entity.
Speaking of profits, Airbnb is a huge shift in all these cities. When Airbnb came in, it had a rippling effect, but really caused a lot of homelessness and a lot of people who were just getting by to be able to be housed. Any thoughts about regulation of entities like Airbnb?
Well, I think it's already happening across the country. You're starting to see it in municipalities. And again, I think that this is important. I respect that that's I think all of us with all of these tools, right? We utilize these tools. I'm sure everybody in this, chat, probably in this room, virtual room, has probably knows somebody that's used an Airbnb, but we need to incentivize the ability to keep housing for housing, and to not create incentives where people can use it just for profiteering and take it out of the housing market. So that is going to be something that is going to come locally. It's less of a federal. There's some pieces of federal regulation for Airbnb, but I think this will be something that jurisdictions, municipalities will have to determine for themselves based on their housing stock.
You spoke earlier about how institutional racism is baked into our processes, and over the last just half a dozen years, in the addiction side of our conference, diversity has grown tremendously, and there's a whole lot of new and especially young people. It's really exciting, really changing our practice. But over on the housing side, it's moving much slower. How can we address that as public agencies in bringing people in who will make change?
Well, I think it does start with the processes. And I'll tell you, this is something that I've been thinking a lot about, because one of the things we did at the Progressive Caucus is working with the Black Caucus and the Hispanic Caucus and the Asian American Caucus, we really prioritized what we call Justice 40, which is the idea that in all federal investments, 40% of those federal dollars should be set aside for those who are most disproportionately burdened. And what we have found, it was a great success. The Biden administration has really embraced this. It was a great success in terms of moving the ball forward on talking about institutionalized racism and race and what needs to change and where resources need to go. But the challenge we are honestly having right now is shifting the way our systems work. And so a lot of our grant-making agencies are focused on getting money out through processes that naturally stop those communities from participating, right? So if you do a reimbursement system for grants and a small agency that represents the most vulnerable does not get that money for a year, they can't survive. So we now have something called direct pay, which is being incorporated into some of our federal grant-making processes, where agencies can get paid quickly, immediately, and you're not in a situation where you have to cover for the federal government in order to get a grant. We've also been trying to look at ways that we can get money to smaller entities that simply could not possibly go through the bureaucracy of a federal grant. And so we've traditionally relied on states and localities, but every time you do that, you take money out of the system, right? Every time you go through another middleman. So is there a way to make our grants able to go to these smaller entities that represent diverse and disproportionately burdened communities directly? And so those are the things we're working on now. But I will tell you, it's a challenge because it's like shifting the Titanic. You know, these are systems, huge federal government systems that have been around for a long time, and they're hard to shift. And so that is one of the challenges we're dealing with. I also think that who you put at the decision-making table matters. You can't say that, you know, we want to deal with, you know, we want to affect the most disproportionately burdened, but then not have anybody representing those communities in a real way, not one voice at a table that has, you know, that is 15 and you're the only voice making a case for something. It can't be like that. It really has to be representative of those who are most disproportionately burdened. And that's why for us, when we put together a bill, we create a coalition. Sometimes it takes 6 months, 9 months to create a bill, from my Medicare for All bill to my Dignity for Detained Immigrants bill to my Housing as a Human Right bill. The process of how you put together legislation is really important, and creating that space for people at the table is critically important.
And so it's really an exciting time. It's really, I hope to see housing shift and change as much as we've seen addiction shift. It's happening in other cities around the country and other states, and so I'm really looking forward to it. But you talked about earlier about this is a structural failure and not so much a moral failure. And of course, in the news, we see the blame going to the individual who's in crisis, and the system goes sort of scot-free. Can you speak a little bit about that structural failure and how that is also, you know, human caused?
Yeah, this really gets my goat. It really gets my goat when people talk about poverty as a personal failure. We showed, I'll just give you an example with the child tax credit. When Democrats passed the child tax credit in the American Rescue Plan with not a single Republican vote, which gave money directly from the government to families with children, a certain amount of money for each child so that they could take care of their kids, we showed that we could reduce childhood poverty by 50%. Childhood poverty went down by 50%. So we know that poverty is a bad policy choice. We even know how to fix it. We have documented evidence of how to fix it. And then Republicans and a couple of Democrats/independents in the Senate refused to reauthorize the child tax credit. And I think that, and so it lapsed. And guess what happened to poverty rates? They went right back up. So in the wealthiest country in the world, the fact that we have 130 million people of low wealth or no wealth, poor people and low wealth people, is absolutely outrageous to me. And to me, it is a clear example that we as a country do not suffer from scarcity. We suffer from greed. We suffer from greed. We have enough money to continue to increase Department of Defense spending, Pentagon spending, the only agency that has never been audited, never passed a successful audit. And yet every year we increase DoD funding, even beyond what General Austin, our military leaders, ask us for. And yet we say we don't have money to put into housing, or we don't have money to put into a child tax credit, or we don't have money to put into universal health care. And so I think that when it comes to housing, we have to be clear that all of these institutional structures that criminalize poverty, look at even the way we define poverty, which is what is used to get people into housing, right? Public housing. Mm-hmm. There's a measure of poverty that is so outdated, that so does not reflect where we are. And then we make it even worse by using measures like state median income. What does that mean for Portland and Seattle? If you use I'm getting a little wonky here, but if you use a state median income threshold, then it means that the average teacher in my district, school teacher in my district, because our wages are higher, because we passed a $15 minimum wage, and because our costs are higher, we have the third most expensive housing market in the country in Seattle. We suddenly disadvantage people who are barely making it because we're using a threshold that includes a very remote part of Washington state for, as well as, and using it to kind of bring down the average so that, or the median,
Wow.
so that it just doesn't make sense in a place like Seattle. So there are all kinds of reasons why we continue to criminalize poverty and why we have such outdated systems. And it's complicated because there are a lot of places that we need to fix. And sometimes we can't do it all at once. So we try to pick the things that are going to have the biggest impact. And we try to pick the things that would have a big impact, but don't require legislation. And so it just narrows the frame of the solution sometimes beyond what I think it should be. But to your question, it is just so outrageous to think about criminalizing homelessness and criminalizing the people who experience houselessness, because there are so many factors built into the structures of mental health treatment, of incarceration, of poverty that lead people to those places. And instead of doing what we need to do to offer the supportive services, we criminalize the person. And I have been saying over and over again, this is a structural failure. It is not a personal failure.
Well, this is fantastic testimonies to the power of Congress. That vote by the Republicans is amazing. It's the audacity of despair. Just very sad. Let me bring it home a little bit and ask you. You mentioned Seattle being your home district. A terrible thing happened in Seattle a couple of years ago. A political campaign called Compassion Seattle. And we're going to have a speaker on this, break this down into tiny detail tomorrow. But what's the situation today in Seattle as far as homelessness and addiction?
Well, I think it's challenging, as it is in Portland and every other major city. We have a lack of affordable housing. We have a lack of supportive housing. We have an increasing frustration in the political feelings of our constituents. That is leading us to do things that we've stepped away from, criminalizing drug use, criminalizing homelessness. All of these things are reactions to the frustration of not being able to deal with, the houselessness that we're seeing. And I think the challenge has been, and, the federal government, look, I try to respect city council and our local leaders in their approaches. I think what I have appreciated is the increasing attention to building coalitions, to making sure the people who are most disproportionately affected are at the table. A regional solution. It can't just be Seattle. It has to be regional, just like for Portland. It has to be regional. And the attempt to try a number of different things. I mean, housing first models have proven to be really effective in Seattle. That's why I'm pushing a housing first bill, because I know it works. And I think if we can continue to focus on that while also not dismissing the concerns of our neighbors, because I think, we just have to recognize that there's a fear out there and that people want to be safe and they don't know quite how to think about this. And I think there are a lot more people out there who want to be humane and compassionate to people, but they also want to feel safe themselves. And I think what we have to do is bring them in. I've always said there are times when you have to call people out, but there are also times when you have to call people in. And I think we need to call people in to the humanity of who we are and have people reflect on what it would be like to lose your home if you don't know. Use the personal experiences of those who are willing to share. It's an unfortunate burden that we place on people, but storytelling does work and people do relate to other people. And so when people talk about being houseless and what that meant to them and why it does help us to organize people and call people to their better selves, because I think that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with unfortunate pushback, and sort of return to criminalizing behavior instead of focusing on humane solutions. But I also am really inspired by a lot of the housing advocates and the coalitions and the state. The governor really prioritized putting money into housing. We got a lot of money from there. We do have a regional homelessness authority. It's gone through some challenges, but there is a recognition of a different way of dealing with things. We are trying different ways of dealing with our encampments. And there is a big battle around criminalizing encampments, but I also think there are people who are recognizing that one-on-one conversations and also developing a new set of systems to places where people can go with their families, culturally competent, with their pets, all hours versus just during business hours. And then you have to pack up. All of these things affect whether or not somebody wants to move into housing, right? Because you want a place that's stable. It's got to be stable. So we're working on it, but we're all learners in this challenge. And I think at the end of the day, we have to be compassionate learners. We have to call people in, but we also have to resist the criminalization of homelessness and of poverty.
That's so inspiring. We have a lot of these similar problems down here in Oregon, and especially in Multnomah County. And you have a special connection down here. Would you speak about that for a moment? This will be our last question.
Oh, I'm so proud of my big sister, Sushila Jayapal. She is a Multnomah County commissioner, and I have to tell you, her passion is housing. So she knows just a huge amount about this. She is such a thoughtful advocate. She is such a smart legislator, and she really has taken the time. She actually came up to Seattle. I helped set her up with some of the people in Seattle so she could meet with people in Seattle and really look at what was working, what challenges we have, what are the differences between Portland and Seattle, King County and Multnomah County. But I'm just so proud of her. She's an amazing sister. I love her dearly. And she's also an amazing, effective advocate and legislator. And she brings so much to bear. So thank you, residents of Multnomah County that helped elect my sister, Sushila Jayapal. You have such a champion, not just on housing, really on every issue of social justice. And I'm just very proud and really thrilled that she decided to run for office, and that she got elected, and that she's just going to continue to make such change happen.
She's doing a great job. The county commission met last week with Chair Vega Pedersen, who spoke a little earlier, and Commissioner Jayapal voted for an enormous amount of windfall funds, about $60 million, to go to a variety of supportive housing needs. We now have a lot of work to do to spend that money, but she made it happen.
That's right. That's right. She totally did. And she is, this is, like I said, I think housing has become really one of her top passions. And she also, by the way, gets the racial, she really is attuned to the racial injustice in a lot of this work, and is really committed to reforming institutions. So anyway, I can brag about her forever, but I'm thrilled that you've got her there helping you to really lead to a solution.
I think she's in the conference here somewhere. Well, thank you, Representative Jayapal. It's been wonderful talking to you.
I didn't even know she was there listening. So hi, Sush. Good to see you.
We're really glad to have had you speak to us. It's inspiring. It's informative, provocative. Keep it up. Go kick their ass. And keep coming back.
Sounds like that vote is going to happen. It could happen soon, could be a long time. I don't know, but I'll take with me the seriousness of the issues that we discussed today, and I'll take with me to the floor the commitment that I have to make sure that I do everything in my power, everything in the power of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, to fight for humane housing solutions that really recognize and lift up the dignity of all of us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.